Welcome to Piece of the Past. Here, history is not loud, it is a whisper. Candles glow, apartments crinkle, a tale of the past whispered softly to you. This is your sanctuary of soft storytelling where we wander the quiet corridors of forgotten places. Breathe in the stillness of the centuries and find calm in the echoes of the past. So get cozy, come closer, and let the past whisper to you. Close your eyes. Let the candlelight flicker gently on the walls. Tonight we step back in time to the spring of 1819 when a little princess was born who would one day rule over the greatest empire on earth. Her name was Alexandrina Victoria, though to her family she was simply Little Rena. She arrived on May 24th, 1819, in the quiet chambers of Kensington Palace in London. At the time, she was nothing more than a tiny infant, fifth in line for the throne. Few thought she would ever wear the crown. Her father, Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, was already in his 50s when she was born. He was the fourth son of the aging King George III and seemed an unlikely father of Britain's future queen. Her mother, Princess Victoire of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, was German, widowed once already, and devoted to raising her children with strict care. But fate has a way of weaving its threads quietly, almost secretly. Within a year of Victoria's birth, her father was dead, leaving the little girl to grow up under the watchful eyes of her widowed mother and the calculating gaze of those who began to see her as the heir to England's future. Victoria's birth was celebrated modestly. She was christened in the grand halls of Kensington, given the name Alexandrina in honor of her godfather, Tsar Alexander of Russia, and Victoria after her mother. Few imagined that history would remember her by the latter name alone. As a baby, she was spirited and bright-eyed. Observers would later say that even in her cradle, she seemed to carry a quiet dignity, the kind of presence that made people take notice. But at this tender age, she was simply her mother's beloved child. Her earliest years were touched by both privilege and fragility. She lived within the stately walls of Kensington Palace, surrounded by servants, governesses, and tutors. Yet she was also vulnerable, fatherless before her first birthday, her future uncertain. Her world was small, filled with nursery rooms and gardens, a world where German was spoken as often as English. Her half-sister, Princess Theodora, became her first playmate, and her mother's ever-present companion, Sir John Conroy, would soon cast a long shadow over her childhood. But in these first years, before schemes and isolation took hold, little Victoria was like any child. She loved her dolls. She clung to her governess, Baroness Lehzen, who would become her lifelong friend. Above all, she adored her mother. Duchess of Kent often gazed at her daughter with fierce devotion, whispering that her greatest fear was that she loved the child too much. For in this small, fatherless girl, all her hopes now rested. Outside the palace, the kingdom was restless. George III was old and mad. George IV was indulgent and unpopular. No surviving heirs filled the line of succession. One by one, Victoria's uncles, childless or grieving lost infants, failed to secure the future of the House of Hanover. So, quietly, without anyone quite realizing it, Crown's destiny was moving closer and closer to the cradle of the little girl at Kensington. Even as a toddler, Victoria's future was already being shaped. She was kept away from her father's side of the family, her life carefully managed by her mother and Conroy. Yet, there were those who saw in her a spark, a strength, a possibility that this small child might one day hold Britain's future in her hands. And so, dear listener, the story begins. A lonely child, cherished by her mother, bound by duty she could not yet understand. The infant princess who would grow to become Queen Victoria. The palace was large, but her world inside it was small. She was kept apart from most of her father's family, isolated from children of her own age. The only real companion she had was her beloved half-sister, Princess Theodora. Together, they played simple games, whispered secrets, and leaned on each other in a world where few others were allowed in. Even Theodora's presence could not fill the silence that surrounded Victoria. When Theodora married and moved away to Germany, Victoria felt the loss deeply. She was left with her governess, her mother, and the endless company of adults who monitored her every move. Yet, in that solitude, she found ways to amuse herself. She gathered dolls, dressing them carefully, giving each a name and a story. These little figures became her kingdom, her court, her friends. She poured into them the affection and imagination that she had no other outlet for. She also had one true living companion. Her little spaniel dog, Dash. Dash followed her everywhere, wagging his tail, offering loyalty and joy only pet can give. In later years, when Victoria was queen, she would still speak fondly of him, remembering how much comfort he brought to her childhood. Victoria's governess, Baroness Lehzen, was another figure who filled her lonely days. Warm and protective, Lehzen became almost like a second mother to her. She encouraged Victoria's studies, but also gave her kindness, affection, and the rare freedom to simply be a child. And still, the palace felt heavy. Rules surrounded her. She was not allowed to walk downstairs without someone holding her hand in case she stumbled. She could not read a novel without permission. She was never, not once, permitted to play or sit alone. Always a pair of eyes, always the weight of expectations. The little girl who might be queen grew up in a kind of gilded cage. She later wrote in her diary that her childhood was rather melancholy, and yet within her small frame beat a strong heart and a will that would not break. The loneliness shaped her, yes, but it also gave her resilience. It made her cling to her dog, her dolls, her governess, and the faint hope that one day she would live beyond the walls of Kensington. For now, she was simply a child, lonely, quiet, yet filled with dreams she could not yet name. This was the childhood of Victoria, the princess kept in shadows. The child watched day and night, and yet one who carried inside her the spark of a future queen. Lehzen was more than a governess. She was a guardian, a confidant, and a friend. Under her guidance, Victoria's days became a rhythm of discipline and devotion. Morning lessons began promptly at 9:30. For 2 hours, Victoria read, recited, and copied her letters. Then, after a pause for the day's duties, she returned in the afternoon for more hours of study. She learned history, the great tales of kings and queens who had ruled before her. She studied geography, gazing at maps of faraway lands she had never seen. Natural philosophy opened her eyes to the mysteries of the world, while music and painting stirred her spirit. Languages were considered most important. French, German, Italian, even Latin. Victoria spoke them all with growing confidence. German was her mother's tongue, English was her birthright, and French became a language of diplomacy that she used with ease throughout her life. Yet, despite her diligence, she was still a child. Her spelling was often poor, her handwriting uneven, but her mind was quick, curious, and alive. Victoria loved to draw with her pencils and paints. She sketched the palace gardens, her pets, and the faces of those around her. She was also a singer, her clear young voice echoing through the rooms of Kensington. These little gifts of art and music gave her comfort in a world that so often felt narrow and controlled. Above all, she wrote. From a tender age, she kept a diary, pouring into it her thoughts, her feelings, her small, daily joys. These pages, written in a child's neat script, would grow into a lifetime habit. Through them, we can still hear her whispers across the centuries. Her education, though broad, was shaped by the times. It was the sort of learning thought proper for a well-bred young lady. Music, languages, drawing, deportment, not the hard study of politics or statecraft. No one truly imagined that this little girl would soon be queen, and yet it was enough to prepare her spirit. She learned patience, she learned devotion, and with Lehzen's gentle encouragement, she gained the confidence to speak her mind, even in a household where freedom was so often denied. So picture her now, the little princess at her desk, her candle burning low, her governess beside her, her diary open upon the table, each lesson a step toward the destiny that waited silently just beyond her childhood. For now, we come to the shadows that darkened Victoria's youth. Her childhood was not only marked by loneliness, but by a system of rules, of control, of constant watching. They called it the Kensington System. This was no ordinary household routine. It was an elaborate design woven by her mother, the Duchess of Kent, and her advisor, Sir John Conroy. On the surface, it was said, the child princess, to keep her pure, safe, and unspoiled. But in truth, it was a cage. Victoria was never permitted a single moment alone, not to read, not to play, not even to walk down a staircase without someone's hand in hers. Her life was a chain of supervision, every breath measured, every step controlled. At night, she still slept in her mother's room, even as she grew into her teenage years. By day, she was shadowed by her governess, her tutor, her mother, or Conroy himself. A watchful circle, never letting her out of sight. Books were censored, novels were forbidden, friends of her own age were scarce. The walls of Kensington Palace closed in tighter and tighter, until the girl who was to be queen felt more like a prisoner than a princess. Conroy had his reasons. He wished to bind her to him, make her dependent. If she became queen as a child, her mother would serve as regent, and he, her closest advisor, would hold great power. Kensington System was his design, his way to keep the young Victoria under his grasp. But Victoria, even in her youth, resisted. Asked her to sign papers granting him authority as her secretary and treasurer. Weak, frightened, and alone, she refused. Even then, her spirit would not bow. Yet the toll was heavy. The constant pressure, the endless control, strained her bond with her mother. What had once been affection turned to mistrust. The Duchess, swayed by Conroy's influence, stood as one of the walls that trapped her child. And so Victoria endured, day after day, year after year, beneath this suffocating system, always watched, never free. Still she endured. The candle of her will flickered, but it did not die, for in silence, in solitude, in shadows, the young princess was learning to resist, learning to wait, and learning that one day she would be free. In the glow of the candlelight, we see young Victoria surrounded by figures, each one shaping her in ways she could not yet see. Some filled her heart with warmth, others with dread. Her mother, the Duchess of Kent, was the first and closest presence. She loved her daughter deeply, perhaps too deeply, often saying that her greatest fear was that she adored Victoria too much. The Duchess clung to her child, determined to raise her into a woman worthy of the crown she might inherit. From her, Victoria learned devotion and also a sense of duty. Over time, the shadow of Sir John Conroy crept in. The mother's love became entangled with control. Closeness between mother and daughter slowly cracked, leaving behind suspicion and hurt. Beside her, always watchful, was Baroness Lehzen. She was more than a governess. She was Victoria's confidant, her shield, her constant friend. In Lehzen, Victoria found comfort and trust. It was Lehzen who encouraged her to read, to write, to learn history, to find a voice. She stood quietly by her side when others sought to dominate her. Victoria Lehzen was love and loyalty made flesh. And then there was her uncle, Leopold of Saxe-Coburg, later King of the Belgians, toothed little princess. He was a guiding light, a father figure she had lost too soon. In his letters, he gave her advice, encouragement, and a sense of connection beyond the walls of Kensington. He told her of duty, of patience, of what it meant to be both strong and kind. She cherished him. She trusted him. She wrote of her gratitude, calling him her best and kindest advisor. His steady hand reached across borders, across distance, to remind her that she was not alone. And yet, always in the background, stood Sir John Conroy. He was the dark figure in her youth, the man who plotted to control her future, who whispered into her mother's ear, who sought to bind her with fear. He pressed her, pushed her, demanded her obedience. But Victoria, even in her teens, resisted him. His presence taught her to be wary, to guard her heart, and to trust only those who truly loved her. His scheming gave her a will of iron, a determination never to be ruled by another. These were the guiding lights and the dark shadows that formed the young princess. They molded her heart, shaped her spirit, and prepared her for the day she would stand alone as queen. Remained unbroken. The girl who played with dolls and wrote in her diary was growing into a queen. In 1836, her family arranged a meeting that would change her life. From Germany came her cousins, among them a young man named Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. He was only 17, with kind blue eyes and a thoughtful face. Victoria wrote of him in her diary, whispering her admiration onto the page. He is so sensible, so kind, so good, so amiable. Her heart, starved of companionship, felt the stirrings of love. Though no engagement was made, the seed was planted. Albert would become the great companion of her life. Meanwhile, the kingdom itself waited. Her uncle, King William IV, grew old and frail. He feared dying before Victoria came of age, for then a regency would fall into the hands of the Duchess of Kent. And Conroy, at a banquet, the king raised his voice, declaring that he prayed to live until Victoria turned 18, so that the throne would pass directly into her hands. And so the days passed, one by one, until the morning of May 24th, 1837, Victoria's 18th birthday. At last, she was free from the threat of a regency. At last, she could claim her place as sovereign when the time came. That time came sooner than anyone expected. Only weeks later, on the morning of June 20th, 1837, a knock came at the door of Kensington Palace. Messengers entered, bowing low. The king was dead. The girl was now queen. Victoria rose from her bed, still in her nightgown, her heart pounding. She asked for something she had never been given before. Now alone, for the first time in her life, she stood by herself, free, unchained, and crowned with the weight of a nation. That same morning she held her first council. Men old enough to be her grandfathers knelt before her, astonished at her composure. The young queen, barely 18, carried herself with calm dignity. She was ready. So ends the tale of her young life, the childhood of loneliness, the girl guarded and controlled, princess shaped by love and shadows alike. Yet, when the moment came, she stepped into the light. She was no longer little Dorina, no longer simply the child of Kensington. She was Queen Victoria. Thank you for spending this quiet moment in history with me here at Piece of the Past. If you enjoyed your stay in the candlelight, please subscribe so the next story finds you. Until then, may your nights be calm and your dreams timeless.